So now we have protected our private data member number of sides. So let's check out value and see what we need to do to make sure it is protected. So if we go in here, let's start with number of, or set value. And notice what we're doing. We're setting it to whatever they send it. So are all values valid? Let's think about it. What can if we have a dice and we roll it, what values can it have? Well, it can have anything from 1 to the number of sides. If we have a 6-sided dice, it can be 1 to 6. If we have a 12-sided dice, it can be 1 to 12. If we have a 20-sided dice, 1 to 20. So not any value works, and it actually depends on the dice itself. So it's going to be different for every dice. So how are we going to manage this when it can be different from one dice to another, right? We're writing this class so that it works with any dice. And so how do we do that? Well, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to test to see, we know it's a problem if it's less than 1, and we know that it's a problem if it's a greater than the number of sides. And so we have to make sure it's within that. We have to make sure it's 1 or greater, right? Greater than 0, and that it's less than or equal to number of sides. And so that's the range it can be in. And then we have to decide what we do if they send a value that's not in that range. So let's say that we have a dice, it has a current value of 5, and it's a 6-sided dice. Well, what if they want to say 13? They want to set the value to 13. That's not valid, so we definitely won't set it to that. What should we set it to? Well, we could simply leave it at 5, right? So if we just leave it the value that it is, then it'll be fine, because that value, we're always protecting value so that it's valid, so we can just leave it the way it is. So let's do that. Let's ask if it's correct. So if value is greater than 0, right? It's greater than 0, and value is less than or equal to number of sides. And that's, notice this is the data member number of sides, so it's the one related specifically to this dice. Then we can set it, right? And we can set it to that value. Okay, this is making me a little uncomfortable that in 0, let's say that the value is greater than or equal to 1, and then we're seeing both edges. We're seeing it can be 1, and it can be as high as number of sides. So it's greater than or equal to 1, and it's less than or equal to number of sides. Then we can set the value, the private data member value, to that value. And there we've protected it. And then what happens if it's not a valid value? We do nothing, right? We're doing nothing here, so it will remain the value that it was before that method was called. Let's go ahead and let whoever uses this, by putting in the documentation, let's make sure we explain how this works. So it sets the value of the dice. And let's tell them what the value is. That is the value facing up, is what that is. The parameters, the value, is the value of the dice, and must be 1 to the number of sides. Must be in the range, 1 to the number of sides. And then let's give them a remark about what happens. So we say a remark. If a value is sent that is out of range, the value will not be changed. Okay. So if a value is sent that is out of range, the value, let's say, of the dice will not be changed. All right. And then we've explained to them what's going to happen. You send something that's invalid, we won't change the value. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So if we go in main and we go up here and we say my dice 3 dot set the value, and let's go ahead and say we're going to set it to 12. We know that's valid and we know what it is. Let's set the value to 16 and see what happens, or 22 and see what happens, because we know that that's out of range. And then we want to print it out. So number of sides, let's put number value of my dice, and we do my dice 3, and here we want to get the value, and we can print that out. All right, so let's see what happens when we try to set it to something that isn't correct. We go up there to my dice, and it says the value is set to 6 and dice is 12, so that works out fine. So it didn't, instead of setting it, we tried to set it to 22, and it didn't. It set it to 6. And it shows up down here, it's 12 sides and 6. Let's run it again, because we're thinking that that number, oh, it just left it what it was. So we don't know what it was when it rolled. So since it just rolled, we expect that'll be something different. But it's in the correct range, which is the part that we're concerned about. So it might change. In this case, it's 11, and so it just left it the same. So that worked out great. So, and let's go check and see if there's anywhere else that we need to supervise this. So remember, we had to check somewhere. We had to do more on this, on the set number of sides. So let's see if we have to do for set value. Let's see wherever else it happens. Here, set value is set, but again, we're safe because that's a random number that's in the correct range, so it's not a problem there. Here, value is simply being output, so it's not being changed, so that one's okay. If we go up to set number of sides, doesn't do anything. And then let's look at the constructors. Now, the constructors set the value to 2. That's valid for all dice, right? Here it sets the value to 3. That's valid for all dice except ones that are of size 2. So that one might not be valid. So let's go ahead and change this. We could set it to 2, which would be a valid value, or 1 would be a valid value. But do we need, let's think about if we're going to have a whole set of dice, do we want them all to start with the same value? That'd be like dumping a bag of dice out and saying they're all going to start with 1 facing up, and that doesn't seem reasonable. Instead, let's go ahead and use our roll method, just like we did in the set value, right, or set the number of sides. Let's go ahead and use our roll method to set it, because that will set the value and it will be random. So each dice will get its own random value. Now, for it to be in a valid range, we want to set the number of sides first, and then after they're set, we want to do roll. Well, actually, if we think about that, what happens when it sets the number of sides? When we set the number of sides, it does a roll. So value is going to be set automatically for us. So in this case, we're not going to have to do it because we know it's going to be set when we call set number of sides. Now up here, if we do value 2, notice here we're not calling set number of sides. So let's get rid of it here too, so they're not always a 2. And let's just call roll up here. And that way it will give it a random value, and it'll be after the number of sides is set, so it'll be in the correct range.